He said it casually, like it was nothing, like it was just a line tossed over dinner. "You're like a ghost in the kitchen these days." Everyone laughed, our 2 grown sons, their wives. Even he chuckled, sipping from his glass, looking past me like I wasn't even part of the conversation. Like the joke didn't land directly in my chest. He didn't say it to be cruel. But cruelty doesn't always come with sharpness. Sometimes it comes wrapped in the ease of familiarity, in the comfort of knowing someone won't push back. I didn't respond. I cleared the table. I smiled. I disappeared, like he said I did. But the next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cooked, not to feed, not to serve, but to remember myself. And that one meal changed more than just the tone at the dinner table. It changed how they saw me, and more importantly, how I saw myself. We'd been married for 34 years, the kind of long, quiet marriage built on habit and time. Our children had grown, married, and moved out. The house had shrunk in their absence, filled with muted routines. Coffee at 7, bills on Fridays, dinner around 6:30 sharp. We weren't unhappy, just unremarkable, comfortable, predictable. In our early years, I loved cooking, really loved it. I used to clip recipes from magazines, handwrite notes in the margins, and tweak spices like I was painting on a canvas. Sunday nights were sacred. Meatloaf, homemade pies, long dinners where laughter replaced background noise. But time has a way of eroding joy when no one notices it. The boys got busy. My husband got quieter. Meals became more about obligation than celebration. I started simplifying. Fewer ingredients, faster prep, less mess, store-bought pies, pre-washed greens. Eventually, I stopped trying new recipes altogether. No one noticed. Or if they did, they never said anything. I became a presence in the kitchen, not a personality. Still moving, still serving, still invisible. It wasn't resentment at first, just weariness. A growing sense that what I once offered, thoughtfully and with pride, had become expected, taken for granted. Background. Then came that dinner. Our youngest, Evan, and his wife were visiting. I'd thrown together a baked pasta and a grocery store salad. I was tired, but I still made sure everyone had what they needed. And then, as I was clearing plates, my husband leaned back and said, "You're like a ghost in the kitchen these days." He smiled as he said it. Evan laughed. His wife gave an awkward chuckle. I didn't. I froze for half a second, then gathered. The dishes. No one noticed the shift. I finished the cleanup, wiped the counter, and went to bed without saying much. My husband didn't ask if something was wrong. Why would he? I was always fine, always functioning. But that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, those words circling like moths. A ghost in the kitchen. And what haunted me most wasn't the insult. It was the fact that it felt true. Not because I lacked presence, but because they had stopped seeing me long before he said it out loud. The morning after he called me a ghost, I moved through the house like normal, poured his coffee, fed the cat, folded a load of laundry. Routine wrapped itself around me like armor, every motion carefully measured, every emotion tucked away. But something had shifted. That sentence echoed with every cupboard I opened, every utensil I picked up. A ghost in the kitchen. He had meant it lightly, I told myself. Maybe even as a joke. But that's what made it worse. That he could say something so quietly cruel and not realize it had teeth. Later that afternoon, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my old recipe binder. It was worn. The pages rippled, from sauce splatters and age. My handwriting stared back at me, notes in the margins, stars next to favorites, little arrows pointing to words like more time or add lemon zest. My fingers grazed a page labeled autumn roast chicken with sweet onions and cider reduction. That dish had once made my husband close his eyes after the first bite. I hadn't made it in over 15 years. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was defiance, maybe it was longing, maybe it was something simpler, a need to see if there was still a part of me in this kitchen that didn't feel invisible. I went to the store with purpose, picked out herbs with patience, chose a bottle of cider that reminded me of the orchard we used to visit in our 20s. Back home, I put on music, Joni Mitchell, just like I used to, and tied on my old apron, the one with the cranberry stains that never quite washed out. And as the chicken browned and the onions caramelized, the house began to smell like memory, like effort, like care. By the time my husband walked in from the backyard, the kitchen was filled with warmth, not just from the oven, but from intention. He paused. "What's all this?" I didn't answer right away, just smiled, turned back to the stove and said, "Dinner." It was the first word I'd said to him all day that wasn't out of obligation, and it carried more weight than he knew. Dinner that evening looked nothing like our usual weeknight routine. I set the table with our heavier plates, the good ones, the ones we hadn't used since Evan's rehearsal dinner 2 years ago. I folded cloth napkins, lit a single white taper in the middle, and placed the roast chicken on a serving platter, instead of leaving it in the pan. My husband noticed, but he didn't say much, just looked around the kitchen like it was a museum he hadn't visited in a while. "Looks nice in here," he said, his tone unsure, almost suspicious. I just nodded. Thought I'd try something different. The boys weren't visiting that night. It was just us, like it used to be. No distractions, no excuses. Just a table and 2 people with 34 years of shared life and growing silence between them. We ate slowly. He took the first bite and stopped mid-chew. "This is, wow," he said. "This tastes like, what is this?" "Autumn roast," I said, "from the old binder." He paused, looking at me across the flickering candle. "You haven't made this in, 15 years?" 17. He smiled, impressed. "Tastes exactly the same." That should have pleased me, but there was an ache underneath it, because what he meant was, "You're capable of this, but you haven't cared to do it in years." And he wasn't wrong. I hadn't. But I also hadn't been seen in years. As we ate, he began reminiscing about that autumn we'd first tried it, how the leaves had turned early that year, how the boys had spilled cider in the back seat on the way home from the orchard. We laughed. Not loudly, not theatrically, but together, and it felt real. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. "You know," he said, leaning back, "I didn't mean anything by what I said the other night, about you being a ghost." I looked up. "Then why did you say it?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know. Maybe because I miss you here, not just the food, you." I swallowed. The honesty hit hard. "I never left," I said. "You just stopped looking." That silenced him. And it was true. I had stayed in this kitchen, every day, every meal, even as my spirit slowly dulled. I still prepared food, still folded napkins, and still refilled glasses. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped showing up fully. Not because I stopped loving, but because no one seemed to notice if I did or didn't. "You stopped talking." "To me," I added quietly. "You stopped asking what I was trying to create here. You just expected." He blinked. "I didn't know." "That's the point," I said. "You didn't ask." He looked down at his plate, then backed up at me with something like regret, or maybe recognition. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't realize you felt invisible." I took a deep breath. "I didn't either, not until you named it." There it was, my truth laid bare. I hadn't even known how deeply I'd vanished until he'd spoken it aloud. And now that I had returned, I wasn't sure if I could stay unless something shifted, not just the meals, the meaning. We finished the rest of dinner in silence, not the kind born of anger, but the kind that follows revelation. And for the first time in years, I felt like we were sitting at the same table, Not just eating the same food, but actually seeing each other. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the candles had burned low, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. The same hands that had prepared thousands of meals, folded hundreds of lunch bags, stirred soups through sickness and comfort, and made birthday cakes with more care than applause. For years, these hands had worked, but somewhere along the way, they'd stopped creating, and I had stopped asking why. I thought back to when I was younger, before marriage, before motherhood, back when the kitchen was a space of experimentation, not expectation. I used to dance barefoot while flipping pancakes. I'd hum to myself while letting sauce simmer, not out of duty, but delight. There was joy there, quiet and private. But life moved quickly. Children came, bills came, grief came. And like so many women I knew, I shifted into the role of provider, emotional, physical, practical. I kept everything going, efficiently, reliably, and in doing so, I lost the parts of myself that had once made this space sacred. What stung the most about my husband's ghost comment wasn't the insult. It was that I had become that ghost in more ways than I wanted to admit. Not just in the kitchen, but in my own sense of identity. I used to be curious, playful, even a little bold. I used to try new things, not just new recipes, but new ways of living. Somewhere along the way, I had traded all that for predictability. Because predictability felt safe. Predictability kept things moving. But it didn't keep me whole. That dinner, the one I had made with full intention, had brought something back to life in me. Not because of how he reacted, but because of how I felt while making it. The way my chest expanded when I tasted the glaze, the way my spine straightened when I set the table. The way I stood in that kitchen with both feet planted, fully present. It reminded me that I still had something to say, still had something to offer, not just to my husband or to my children or to whoever happened to walk through our front door, but to myself. Maybe that's what presence really is. Not just being seen by others, but remembering that you're still here, still worth showing up for, still whole even after years of being muted by routine. That night, I didn't need his praise. I didn't need an apology. I just needed to feel like me again. And I did. The next morning, the kitchen was quiet, bathed in soft golden light that spilled through the windows. I stood at the stove, scrambling eggs with care, not urgency. No one had asked me to. I just wanted to. My husband entered, slower than usual, almost cautious. He looked at the table, freshly wiped, 2 plates already set, and then at me. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," I replied. He stepped closer, hesitated, then gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "Dinner last night. It felt like us again." I nodded. "It did. I didn't realize how far we'd drifted until you brought us back." His voice was quiet, like someone confessing without needing absolution. I could feel the weight behind it, not guilt, but realization. He wasn't just speaking of meals. He meant the space between us, the one filled with unspoken exhaustion and assumptions. I set the eggs on the table and sat across from him. We ate in silence again, but this silence wasn't heavy. It was shared. It was soft. After breakfast, I opened the recipe binder. Pages curled from time and use. I flipped through until I found a blank space in the back and pulled a pen from the drawer. Dinner, roast chicken, autumn glaze, soft candlelight. He noticed. I didn't tell him I'd written it. I didn't need to. It wasn't a return to who we were. It was a step toward who we could still be. That afternoon, I went to the market and picked up fresh herbs, a cut of lamb I hadn't cooked since our 20th anniversary, and a tiny tart pan that reminded me of the bakery in Vermont we once stumbled into on a rainy vacation. I didn't have a plan. I just had a feeling, and that feeling was hope. Not the kind that demands change overnight, but the quiet kind. the kind that brews slowly, like a pot on low heat, reminding you that things can be rebuilt, not because they're broken, but because they deserve more care. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible in the kitchen. I felt present. And presence, I realized, is the most nourishing thing we can ever offer. For a few weeks, it felt like something was healing, not in grand declarations or sweeping gestures, but in the quiet way we moved around each other. I cooked with intention again. He lingered in the kitchen more, helping slice vegetables or drying dishes without being asked. He noticed small things, the way I wore my hair up when it was humid, how I started playing music again while I cooked. It felt like a shared rhythm was slowly returning. But harmony has a way of exposing dissonance when you least expect it. It was a Sunday afternoon when it happened. Our oldest son, Matt, and his wife dropped by unannounced. I was in the middle of prepping dinner, rosemary potatoes roasting, a citrus glaze bubbling on the stove. I welcomed them warmly, offered tea, and asked if they'd stay for dinner. They said yes. My husband smiled, poured wine, and set out for an extra place. Everything seemed fine, until Matt said in passing, "Dad said you've really been stepping things up in the kitchen lately. Guess we woke up Mom's inner chef." He said it with a grin, teasing and light. But my husband chuckled in agreement and added, "Yeah, it's like something clicked. She's been on fire the last few weeks. I'm not sure what got into her." There it was again, the offhand remark, the praise laced with misunderstanding, the joke that reduced my revival to novelty. I smiled, but my hands tightened on the wooden spoon. I wasn't on fire. I wasn't a trend or a phase or a lucky burst of inspiration. I had been here all along, simmering beneath the surface, waiting to be seen. Later, after dinner was over and the kids had left, I sat on the porch while the last of the daylight faded. He joined me, carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea like he always did when the air turned cool. I didn't look at him. When I spoke, "You made it sound like I just started caring again." He paused. "I didn't mean it like that." But that's how it sounded. Like the past 10-15 years of meals meant less because they didn't look like last night's dinner. He was quiet. Then, "I guess I didn't realize how much those years cost you." "They didn't cost me," I said, "but they emptied me, and no one noticed." He exhaled slowly. "You're right. I didn't notice. And I'm sorry." I turned to him. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I just want to be understood. There's a loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being misinterpreted. To be praised for showing up fully only after you've been showing up quietly for years, it hurts. Not because the compliment is false, but because it came too late to be whole. "I want this to last," he said. "Not just the meals, us." "Then see me," I replied. "Even on the days when I don't do anything special. Even when I'm quiet. Even when I'm tired." He nodded slowly. "Okay." We sat there in silence again, this time not out of avoidance, but reflection. He had learned to laugh at what he didn't understand. I had learned to hide behind function instead of expressing my own emptiness. But now, there were no more masks, no more jokes, just the slow, necessary work of unlearning how we had let each other fade. The following week, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I invited the entire family for a meal, not for a holiday, not for a birthday, just because I wanted to. No excuse, no occasion, just a dinner where I could create, not perform. A table where I could be seen, not just thanked. I spent 2 days planning the menu, not out of obligation, but joy. There were dishes I'd always wanted to try: roasted fennel with honey glaze, lemon ricotta pasta, a peach tart with a flaky crust that required more patience than I'd shown anything in years. I prepared with the kind of focus that reminded me of who I used to be. Curious, attentive, excited to create something from nothing. When everyone arrived, the house was filled with the smell of thyme and browned butter. Candles flickered in jars I'd once tucked away for special nights. and soft music hummed from the record player. They all commented on the food, of course. Compliments flowed, photos were taken, and my husband raised a glass to Mom's return to culinary royalty. There was laughter and genuine warmth, but the moment that changed everything came after dessert. My son's wife, Rachel, lingered in the kitchen while I washed a few dishes. She looked around and said softly, "I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but this meal felt like watching someone fall in love with themselves again." I turned, startled by her words. She smiled gently. "I've always admired how steady you are, but tonight felt radiant." And for the first time in years, I didn't deflect the compliment. I didn't brush it off or make a joke. I just said, "Thank you. I think I needed to remember who I was." That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table with a single candle still burning. My husband came and sat across from me, no words between us at first. Then he reached across and placed his hand on mine. "You're not a ghost," he said. "You never were." And I believed him, because I had finally returned to myself, and this time, I wasn't disappearing again. After that dinner, something softened between us. Not just between my husband and me, but between me and the version of myself I had, quietly packed away for years. Life didn't change in sweeping gestures. We still had takeout on Thursdays. I still forgot to buy milk some weeks ago. But there was something deeper now. A return of presence. A return of me. He started sitting at the kitchen counter while I cooked, not to distract, but to watch, to listen, to be with me. We talked more, about little things, about the past, about what we used to love and what we could still rediscover. I began writing. Down recipes again, not just ingredients, but feelings. Notes like, "He smiled when he tasted this," or "We listened to Nina Simone while this simmered." My cooking wasn't just food anymore. It was a memory, reconnection, a kind of intimacy I'd forgotten could exist at the dinner table. The kitchen slowly became mine again, not as a duty, but as a sanctuary. One evening, I opened the drawer where I kept old family photos and found one of us from years ago. I was in an apron, flour dusting my cheek. He was behind me, arms wrapped around my waist, grinning. I placed it in the fridge. We'd both aged, softened, weathered. But looking at that photo now, I didn't feel grief for who we were. I felt gratitude for finding our way back. For a long time, I thought love was supposed to feel like devotion without asking for attention. Like showing up quietly, day after day, and expecting nothing in return. I thought my value was in how seamless I could make life for everyone else, how invisible I could become without complaint. And for years, I was proud of that. Proud of how little I asked for, how much I gave. But now I see things differently. Love isn't quite a racing. It isn't the slow fading of one's presence just to keep the peace or maintain tradition. Love, at least the kind that nourishes, requires being seen. It needs acknowledgement, not praise, not performance, but recognition. What hurt most about being called a ghost wasn't that the word felt cruel. It was that it felt true. I had become a shadow of the woman I used to be, still moving, still serving, but unseen. Not because I wasn't trying, but because somewhere, along the way, I stopped believing I deserved to be anything more than the background. But something changed when I returned to the kitchen with intention. I wasn't just feeding others. I was feeding parts of myself that had gone hungry for years. Creativity, pride, stillness, the joy of offering something that carried my soul, not just my skill. That one meal, the roast chicken, the soft candlelight, the return to an old recipe, wasn't a revival of culinary interest. It was a reclaiming of space, of voice, of value. And the greatest surprise wasn't that my husband noticed. It was that I noticed. I noticed how it felt to move with purpose. To care about flavor, texture, and warmth. to set a table not out of habit, but hope, to see the way my family's eyes softened as they ate, not just because it tasted good, but because it felt like I had come back to them, to myself. And in that process, I didn't just rebuild a marriage, I recovered my own reflection. Now, every time I step into the kitchen, I carry that awareness that I am not a ghost, I am not invisible, I am here, whole, capable of nourishing not just those I love, but the very heart I nearly forgot was mine. These days, I no longer measure the success of a meal by how quickly the plates are emptied or how many compliments follow. I measure it by the stillness it brings, the way conversation flows more gently, how eyes meet more often, how laughter lingers longer in the air. I don't cook to prove anything anymore. I cook because I have something to say. And what I've come to understand is that the kitchen was never the problem. It wasn't the ingredients or the repetition or even the silence. It was that I'd stopped believing my presence there held meaning. But it does. Every stir, every slice, every small act of care is a declaration. I am still here. I still matter. And my voice, even when quiet, carries weight. I'm not haunted by that word anymore. Ghost, because I turned it into a kind of grace, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of our lives, we are allowed to take up space, to reclaim forgotten parts of ourselves, to say, I am not gone, I was just waiting to return, and now I have, fully. If this story touched something, in you, if you've ever felt invisible in the routines of love, family, or life, know this: you are not alone. You are not forgotten, you are seen. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their quiet strength. Leave a comment below and tell us, when was the moment you returned to yourself? And if you're still searching, let this be your invitation to begin. Subscribe for more true, heartfelt stories that honor the quiet, courageous rediscoveries that happen not in storms, but in the stillness of everyday life. You matter, always have.